Whoops.
All right, looks like we're on YouTube. Awesome. Okay. All right. Wonderful. Shall we make a start? Are we right to make a start?
1 second, Catherine, sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine. That's fine. You just let me know.
Hello, Heather. Whoops.
All right, looks like we're on YouTube. Awesome. Okay.
We're going to go viral. Is that the thing?
We wish.
Turn off, Jack.
Sorry,
Do you want chat turned off?
I'm muting now.
No. Do you want chat on YouTube turned off, the live chat function?
Yeah, I think so.
We won't be able to manage it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And climate change always attracts nutters, so let's not.
Not appropriate. No, I think
You're right. You're right.
Instead, we're welcome.
Look,
We do
I was just
welcome-
saying,
I know
Maybe-
where Catherine's coming from on this one.
you should mute me maybe.
Yeah, mute Catherine.
And
No.
maybe I was talking about myself.
Yes, I think so. What we'll do is, if anyone watching on YouTube has anything they would like to ask us about, they're welcome to contact us at Town of Gawler and
Yes.
send inquiries to me.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I should
So-
say it does tend to be divisive politically, so let's not like go down that too much. We want to have constructive conversations in this space.
Did the wind just pick up, or is it my imagination?
Isn't this rain wonderful? I don't know if it's coming through the speaker, but the rain's pouring on the roof.
It's a bit heavy down here as well.
We are good to go.
Wonderful.
Right.
Okay, we'll make a start then. As I said, there's, sorry, I've only got a very small screen and I'm struggling with my screens. Okay, so I'll start with the statement of acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge that this land that we meet on via Zoom today is the traditional lands for the Kaurna people, and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Greater Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today.
Thank you.
So moving on to the attendance record, roll call. I think at this stage we're still missing Tom, Nathan and Angus. And I know Nathan will be hopefully joining us later on. I haven't had any apologies from the people who aren't attending. Tim, have you?
I'm just having a look, but I can't recall any
Yeah.
from. I'll just check Tom. I'll let you know if
Sure.
I see anyone.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Are there, okay, we'll come back to that if we need to. Are there any motions to grant leave of absence? Take that as a no. Leave of absence, we still have Darren Cox. And non-attendance, I guess that's those who haven't given us apologies as of now. Okay, moving on to the confirmation of minutes. Has everybody had a chance to have a look at the minutes? Has anybody got any things they would like to add to the minutes or change of the minutes?
Yeah, just one thing was that I think Angus should be marked down as an apology, not as a non-attendance. He did send me a message halfway through the meeting that sort of I thought I'd mentioned, but I'm not sure now. I think it's been like a month and it's been a bit of a crazy month. But my recollection is that I kind of mentioned it in the meeting to everyone. But obviously, I'm not sure. Like, it's halfway through the meeting, he messaged me.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, we can follow that up, I guess. Yeah. Okay.
I think I can recall that he did call in late and wasn't an apology. I just didn't record it properly, so I'm happy to change him to
Correct
an apology. And I don't think the fact that he called in a bit late should jeopardise it. We're not that formal, I don't believe.
Yeah, no.
Right.
It's any comments on that before we move on? And any other amendments or changes that people would believe warrant changing in the minutes? Would somebody like to move that the minutes are accepted? Tim? Oh, and I think Jack, was that
Jack and
you on
Councillor
screen?
Kosh.
Oh, and
Jack.
Paul, and yeah, great. Wonderful. Okay, that's great. Moving on to item number 4, business arising from minutes. Tim and Jack, would you like to handle this one? Jack, I think you're on mute.
I was just telling Tim his
hi.
mic was off.
Hopefully everyone's got the business arising table in minutes in front of them somewhere. The first item was complete about providing a link to the National Climate Emergency Action Plan. Hang on, let me just see if I'm on the right part. Okay, now I'm on the right one. Okay, we had the task of establishing closed social page for the working group, and Jack and I have not finished that one yet, so that's to be rolled over. Check with governance relating to the recording of the council's webpage. We haven't completed that one yet either, so that's to not complete.
Got one. I've just got it. I can add an update to that, Tim.
Yeah, sure.
Any emails that come in via council's webpage are recorded in terms of trim. So they're kept. A record is kept of any and every email that comes in via the webpage.
Yep, sure. The Town of Gawler Business Development meeting, we haven't arranged that one yet either, so we're not doing too well, but we've certainly spoken about it, and we've spoken with the Gawler Business Development people about it in meetings just informally, and it will happen, so that one has to roll over again as well. On the new actions from the last meeting, actively contributing to the content of the Climate Emergency Action Plan, I am pleased that we're getting some good input by the CEAP members. We'll address that one a little bit later tonight, but it's been really important that people add their suggestions and comments, and that's been progressing. On staff to advise working group on timelines for snapshot assessment and when it will be available. We don't have the exact time frame yet, but the snapshot work has been, the work order's gone to, what's the name of the company, Catherine?
Ironbark Sustainability.
Yeah, it's gone to Ironbark, so that's all happening, and fairly soon I'm sure we'll get a date on when that work will be expected to come back. On sharing documents pertaining to the Climate Active Scope 2 electricity accounting consultation, I did provide a copy of my personal submission at the former meeting, or following the former meeting. We have been working on a much shorter submission to be put in by the Gawler Council, which was really just the answering of the questions and recommendations with a cover letter, and a paper's been put up to the council, so that will be considered at the council meeting on the
Next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday anyway. So that's where we've landed with the minutes, with the business arising.
Wonderful. Okay, thanks for that, Tim. Does anybody have any particular comments to make on that before we move on to item number 5? Okay, thanks. So first of all, 5.1, understanding community power projects, and I'd like to welcome Heather Smith from Changing Weather to give us the next 20 minutes of an update around those things. So thanks very much, Heather, for your conversation around understanding community power projects.
Thanks, Catherine, and thank you all for inviting me. Now I'm going to take over your screens and hope that this works. Can you see my presentation?
We can.
Yes.
Brilliant. The wrong answer would be no, we can see your Zoom screen or something. Right. So I'm hoping to run through this really quickly and then open it up for questions, but you can interrupt me as we go along as well. What I've been working on in the background is a 2-pager that accompanies this slide set. So after the presentation, I'd like to share that 2-pager and a copy of my slides with everyone. And what that 2-pager has is this whole bundle of ideas of things you can do in community energy. So I'm hoping today's just the start of a conversation. Obviously, I've got quite a rich knowledge of what's going on around Australia and a little bit of knowledge about how community energy happens in other places. I'm the chair of the Coalition for Community Energy, and I did a Churchill Fellowship on community energy back in 2016. So let's get started. Let me see if I can get started. There we go. So the community energy sector in Australia is growing. We had our first Congress in 2014. There were just a handful of activists and enthusiasts back then, much of it riding off news from overseas. You know, the German energy transition has its own name, Energiewende, and they say that most of the new generation that has been put into the German electricity system has been community owned. So stories like that have really inspired our sector. Our sector's also had a bit of a boost from the 2 state governments where most of these dots are. New South Wales early on was handing out $50,000 grants to communities, and that led to a whole lot of different initiatives across their regions. And they extended that project, and they continue to look at their regions as possibilities for community energy. Victoria's really started to focus on community energy recently, and they've had a community energy inquiry, and Victoria was one of the earliest community energy sites in Australia with Hepburn Springs Wind Farm, which is 2 wind turbines just out of Daylesford, because back in the time they delivered that, solar wasn't cost effective. But a few years later, solar is cost effective, and solar is one of the big drivers for these projects around Australia. Lots of reasons to support community energy, but I thought I might just try to win this into our current moment in time. Obviously, every council around Australia has been hit by COVID-19 and has budget issues. That's going to be one of your key concerns. We might well be headed for a recession. So generating employment opportunities is going to be something that worries council. And we've just come off the worst bushfire season ever, and that narrative about community resilience is in everyone's minds, and it's particularly in the electricity system's mind, because they got caught out badly by communities that lost power and didn't get it back for a long time afterwards. And of course, all those stories about resilience tap right back into conversations you've been having for a long time about adapting to climate change. On the other side of community energy is our story about how we use our local assets and renewable resources better. So one of the stories that I have in my deck here is from Anova in northern New South Wales. Now, their driver to create their community energy retailer was about doing something positive in an area that was fighting fracking. But their economic story is that they estimated they had $300 million going through their region in electricity costs, and they could capture $80 million in their region if they had a locally based energy retailer. So a very strong economic narrative there. And that's all based on being able to use the local renewable energy resources. But okay, overcoming market failures is another area that I think we're seeing community energy groups heavily invested in delivering energy efficiency, making our electricity system work better for everyone, and advocating for things that help renters and people who are generally locked out of the solar market, for example. And of course, we see a lot of activity that's just about empowering communities. So a lot of these community energy activities have gone ahead without councils. In some cases, the councils have been the instigators. So, and in many cases, the councils soon become the partners. So it's a really nice place for council to play. Now, these slides are just a little diversion to my PhD. So I'm looking at microgrids and redesigning the electricity system through microgrids. And the question I like to ask, so we have a centralised electricity system. We're wondering whether all that local solar will be better planned and utilised locally and make the most of our cheap wind. That's the narrative in South Australia as we go towards 100% renewable energy. Those are our two main sources, solar and wind. And of course, that brings us to a question about, is our future centralised? And the market operator has certainly put some big ideas around massive renewable energy zones, one up in Port Augusta, some in Western New South Wales. Is it individual? There's a big conversation in the electricity market about how the aggregators are going to control everyone's batteries, control everyone's solar systems, play games, give you incentives for demand. But what both of those conversations are missing is what's somewhere in the middle. This might be a theme of mine because that's what my TED talk was about too, when I got to talk at TEDx Adelaide. But the somewhere in the middle recognises that we do generate a collective good at the local neighbourhood level. And my PhD will look a little bit at whether that's at the end of the street transformer, which serves 100 people, or whether it's at that next level up, the 3,000 odd people sitting under a feeder. So let's go through some of those community energy models. And we see quite a lot of different things that community energy groups are trying to deliver. We had a lot of bulk buy models. Bulk buys have been around since Victor Harbour Council championed this in the 2010s, 2011. And they hooked up with Zen Energy back then to do that. We've seen Shine Hub come out of the community energy sector, become much more of a private sector operator. And we've seen them sell their bulk buy through community organisations like the Conservation Council or Trees for Life. But we've also had conversations with installers who don't like the Shine Hub model because it screws them down too much. We saw Port Pirie Council running a bulk buy where people were buying a system that they could pay off through their Centrelink pay. So Centrelink allows you to deduct $20 a week from have an automatic deduction from your Centrelink payment. So, and again, there's a private sector provider in that, and Port Pirie Council went through a whole procurement process. But we see some very strong community-based bulk buy programs too, where volunteers do all the technical analysis, volunteers keep the installers honest and hook up households to solar installers. And we also saw Adelaide City Council try to replicate the Darebin Council scheme, Solar Savers scheme, where households in their community could pay off the solar through their rates. And so that's a really nice mechanism where the household isn't exposed to the full cost of solar, and they're given a little bit of support on that technical decision. Now, in Darebin, the technical support was run by St Vincent's or the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, one of those social services providers, because they were very keen to make sure that people didn't get pushed into solar and in a way that it wouldn't pay for itself. So they wanted to make sure people's savings were high enough to justify putting solar on their homes. That was an opportunity to have a chat to people about energy efficiency as well. So I think the point I'd like to make is that these models work for cheapness when they're very efficient, but they work for the customer when there's an extra layer of care given around how best to save energy. And of course, what we're seeing is in new developments, you can make sure there's a high penetration of solar if you think about that at the beginning and put that in your development approvals. In your shared ownership spaces, Adelaide's obviously got a lot of apartments. We're seeing a lot of strata grapple with how their electricity is shared across groups and how to put on solar. And renters, of course, remain an opportunity because they're typically cut out of this process. Donation models are strong, and I'm talking too much. I'm going to go faster. Donation models are strong in the community energy sector. Carina is an Adelaide-based group. We've got projects I volunteer for them. We've got projects all the way around Australia. We've recently just done an interest-free loan for $80,000. So we're going up in scale, and we're actually seeing our revolving fund speed up as well. We've helped other groups like Quorum develop their own revolving fund, and Bendigo Sustainability Group have a slightly different model. They get businesses to donate towards projects. They own the projects themselves, and they make money for their Bendigo Sustainability Group, which helps sustain all of their work across the Bendigo region. We see a whole lot of investment models, and Tom's partner Rachel is obviously a key person behind Solar Harvest. They've looked at the co-op model. Pingala is another co-op. We saw in the early days, some of these projects had 8% returns, and Clear Sky investments have, you say, why do you volunteer and do all this volunteer work just to give people 8% returns? And their argument was, we are interested in people who don't think about climate change, investing in climate change and becoming more aware and more eager to see this transition. And I've got Sapphire Wind Farm down the bottom there, because when the ACT government committed to 100% renewable energy, it bought energy from Sapphire Wind, and part of the deal was they would open up part of their investment to community co-investment. So that's another model as well. And then we see a whole range of things that are about what the community wants. And I've got here the energy programs. Moreland Energy Foundation's been there for a long time, and they've just rebranded to the Australian Energy Foundation. We've got Totally Renewable Yakandanda set their own goals. They're partnering with their local energy networks. They're doing lots of fabulous, interesting projects across their region. Enova was the first community energy retailer, but we're seeing a lot of councils investigate community energy retailing as well. Indigo Power is in the electorate of Indy, which is in the Wangaratta region in northern Victoria. And we're seeing a lot of community action planning, zero net energy towns, Uralla and Hepburn Springs particularly. So that's the four sort of models. In the leaflet I will send, I've got a whole lot of links to deeper resources there, but I thought I'd just run through, you know, how do you get started? So I'm going to spam you with this long table of ideas of all the things you could do. I would love if you guys would think about let's assume that council's already thinking about how to reduce its own emissions and things it can do to reduce community emissions. And BZE is beyond zero emissions there. So they actually have done a whole report on what other councils are doing. And hopefully council's gone that bit deeper and gone, here are all our practices, here's our procurement and our planning and all the things we do, and they all impact climate change. So we're going to think about all of those. But from a community energy perspective, I'm saying, what if you started with creating an appetite for community energy and reimagining how council and community activities can work together? Because some of the things you want to do on your own corporate emissions and on your own community emissions can be well delivered in partnership with community energy groups. And so, you know, one of those, part of that, identifying how to make the most of renewable energy resources in your area, how to reduce emissions through your electricity demand, and remembering that the electricity system's changing, right? It's going to be transport's going electric and a whole lot of mobility issues. So I've split the table of activities into some of these buckets about the things you can do. And most of them, even though I haven't done all the examples in the leaflet, most of them have examples around Australia, and I'd encourage you to talk to me about them if you're interested in any of them. So over to you guys for questions. I can stop sharing my screen. There we go. Now I can't, you're all on mute, so I'm the only one that can hear me.
There we go. Sorry about that, guys. Yeah, are there any questions for Heather? No, well, fire away, Paul.
Mute. Oh. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Heather, does this revolve around a community group being the auspice of the, you know, of the projects? So is it sort of a community group that grabs all the other, grabs the resources and potentially becomes a supplier, I suppose? So what I'm just want to get my head around exactly what happens. So
and it really depends, Paul. So you think of a way you could structure it, and I bet there's someone in Australia. Oh, that's a good way. We'll structure it that way.
But just like, because I know that Rachel and Tom have been working on this for a while, but it doesn't seem that, I don't know, Tom, has it taken off or what? I know you've been working on it for a while, but like, is there an appetite within the community? That's the first thing. Can Tom, I mean, I'm just like, yeah, can Tom answer that?
You may be on.
Yep.
I can. Obviously, I think that there is a bit of a knowledge gap within the community that we're trying to sort of bridge. And yeah, so it's mostly like, even when I talk to the council and Tim and all these other guys, you know, like there's a little bit of the sort of, maybe I don't articulate that well what that means, because we sort of have to deliver the community energy in a sort of steps. And I suggesting maybe firstly we should start sort of educating people about the options and then bringing them slowly to the journey rather than sort of talking about community energy. As you can see, like what from presentation that Heather just delivered, there is sort of a layers and different approach each community sort of takes, and I believe that's kind of for our community to decide which direction we're going to take. And you know, like we have some ideas what would be sort of a most valuable direction, but not necessarily the community would have appetite for that kind of a sort of a direction. So you know, like and you know, the energy system is sort of changing very quickly. So if we sort of don't settle in on idea, you know, the new ideas come up and sort of confuse the situation at the same time. So therefore, you know, we have to maybe have a planning session and, you know, things what the community wants.
I just suppose, I mean, I have been watching a little bit what you and Rachel have been doing, and I'm not sure whether whether the community's taken that up yet, and that's a concern if the appetite in the community. So Yakandan is one thing. I know that area quite well. I'm from that area originally, so I know Yakandan and those people up there. But you know, it's a different set of people up there. But I'm just wondering whether Gawler and even the Barossa is quite conservative. Gawler's actually a very conservative town, so I'm just wondering the appetite within our community, because we can talk about stuff, but the broader community. You know, if you've been working on this for a while, I don't know, a couple of years, and it hasn't really built momentum yet, you still wonder whether that's the right way to go, or whether you need to go a different way, or physically an issue within this area.
With any organizations, like we had to create the structure around, and you know, like for example, we worked on the community energy with the co-op, especially Rachel, not myself. So they needed to sort of have a legal advice and agree on the structure of the cooperative, and then you know determine the shares, and then do other sort of legal activities. That takes time, and as Heather suggested, most of these people are volunteers. This is not the business. So if we sort of same as our you know, climate emergency working group, we haven't delivered much, and we've been talking for a year and a bit. But you know, the time flies. If something needs to happen, we need to meet more often to sort of see the results. That's kind of where we're at.
Tim,
I think it's worth recognising that South Australia is doing so well on renewables. There's an element of we don't need to, compared to you know, drivers that drove Victorians and New South Wales folk to demand action. But what we'll see in Victoria perhaps this year is a feed-in tariff for community-scaled energy. So I suspect that heading down this path and better understanding what you could or couldn't or might be interested in, and just thinking outside of council has to deliver everything, will help you be ready to go. And you can start with easy opportunities like getting all your community buildings solarised through Carina, for example, right? You know, there are things you can do that help showcase community energy and show how people make things happen.
Thanks, Heather. Tim, you had a comment?
Yeah, thank you. I've just been looking at the terms of reference for the Community Action Plan Working Group, or the Climate Emergency Action Plan Working Group today, and it talks about developing a plan that meets community aspirations. So I'm very focused on that and what we can deliver in preparing the plan that we develop and put on the table so it can be endorsed, and then we can actually move on with actions. We're not going to solve all of this in the next few months when we have to deliver the Climate Emergency Action Plan. But what tonight has done is given me ideas about, wouldn't it be great if we could summarise half a dozen of these potential models for community electricity, include it in what we want to do with the community section, and then put it out with some discussion questions for our community around renewable energy, and say, well, which one would you be most interested in? So, and it might be in just continuing to buy electricity, not doing anything. It might be buying 100% green power. It might be, well, one of these options about working with community schemes and developing one of these things up. And then we might get some feedback, which will help us develop the plan. And then once the plan is approved, then we can actually get on and do the work.
I agree, Tim. My feel is that while there's lots of examples, I think what would help people understand some of the concepts is some sample case studies where we unpick and we say, this group was the initiator, this group did this function, this group did this function, and just run maybe work up, say, 6 case studies or 5 case studies so people can understand the diversity of what it might look like, but it's in real term examples in layman's language as well, because I'm confident that when the economic benefits are there. If it's designed right, the economic benefits can be very powerful, and it's really the communication that is a barrier at this stage, I think, for some of this stuff. But if we can work up some preferred options and then take that to the community, because obviously they'll be critical to achieving what we want to achieve, then we can kind of work out, well, what does have what the community has appetite for, and what version, and what suits our community. Any other comments or questions?
I'm happy to help with case studies.
Wonderful, thank you, Heather.
Direction, but you've got to slim down the ideas.
Yes. Wonderful, we'll take you up on that offer. Any other questions or comments for Heather?
Just on microgrids, you're talking about using the grid. What's the contribution of these groups to actually maintaining the grid?
So microgrid's a bit of a trendy word at the moment, and they're doing it in all sorts of places, but what are they doing is quite different in each place. Now, at the moment, we all pay for the grid, and we pay what's called postage stamp pricing. So someone in the middle of the city or sitting next to the power station pays exactly the same amount, even though they've got hardly any infrastructure feeding that grid to them, as someone way out. And conversely, someone who uses a lot of their own solar energy hardly contributes to the grid that they rely on for that key other part of their service, because obviously their solar energy doesn't cover everything. So microgrids are mainly being driven by the networks at the moment, where they have problems. We've got problems where too much solar is on one system, it's causing voltage problems, it's constrained at the transformer, things like that. And so they're looking at, should we put in a community battery? How should we control things? Those sorts of things. So there's a world of testing solutions happening right at the moment, because we're in a really interesting part of the energy transition.
It's a really interesting response, Heather, because I hadn't thought of microgrids as being a solution to the broader grid problems. I know, where the issue Paul was trying to tease out was around, there's infrastructure that's needed, and how do microgrids kind of pay for that infrastructure, and that was an interesting thing to know, but then also to hear about the other aspect of it, in that it can actually be used to solve grid problems. That's actually quite interesting.
Because just jumping in there, there's some thought around that if we had a lot of microgrids, then we wouldn't be able to maintain the overall network, and then people would be you would have some sectors of the community that would be advantaged, and some sections of the community that would be disadvantaged, because the network may not necessarily function as it should, as it does now, because at the moment we're all paying to maintain the network. So that are at lower socioeconomic are getting a benefit from those at the higher end. And there's a thought around, well, if the people who are doing all right, on microgrids and whatever, but the people that are struggling, that the quality or the value or the reliability of that network might suffer. And so that's that could be an issue.
And we talked about the death spiral of the grid 5 years ago, and now the networks are all quite complacent. They sort of go, well, it didn't happen, did it? And, we've looked at our value proposition, and we are the cheapest battery you can get, right? So I think there's a long way to go there with how we start to spread value. But I am really concerned about the low-income people who don't have solar, who do pay more than everyone else, and how councils and community groups help resolve that unfairness. I think it's a really important thing for us all to be doing.
Yeah, for me personally, I'm really concerned about the people that who struggle, and I'm just, that's always that's in front of my mind. The well-to-do, that's fine, but there's a lot of people out there who are really struggling, and our community is really very conservative, but basically tradies. We've got a huge percentage of people in the trades. That's our demographic. So, that's what it is.
Well, I think the thing is that with the many options that exist out there that I think there's a reasonable chance we'll be able to find something that's suitable. Whether or not we go on with it is a different kettle of fish.
Yeah,
but it's about saying, well, you know, for us, you know, equity and social, you know, fairness is really, really important to us in this project, and then we make that a priority. And it sounds like there's a project for everybody, and we can work on that as a priority. So it's kind of like the technology isn't good or bad, it's how we apply it to solve those problems. But I'm very conscious that we're pushed for time tonight. We were really keen to try and keep it neat and tidy. Is everybody happy with that? Are we got any other questions before we move on? It's a very juicy topic, I know, and I think we might have to have Heather back.
Thank you all. I'll leave you to your meeting, and by all means ask me questions.
Lovely. We appreciate your time. Thank you for joining. Wonderful. That's very interesting. So the item 5.2, Tim Kelly on the update of the plan.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Am I unmuted? You can hear me? Okay, great. Well, as we said at the start of the meeting, we've been working hard to populate the content of the document, and I thank people who have put input and comments in here, but we've actually got some time constraints which are starting to bite. So we've been allocated $20,000 this year to prepare the Climate Emergency Action Plan. There's a bid for some funding next year to work on the Climate Emergency Action Plan. We've chosen to draft the plan ourselves largely, and we've been delayed on the community consultation. So what we're thinking of doing now, and I did provide a bit of a background paper to this, hopefully you've been able to at least have a look at it, is that we're now looking to finish our preliminary input to the plan, bring our ideas together, and we've agreed on a structure and drop everything in there. So if we work hard on that for the next couple of weeks, what we'd like to do is engage a consultant to help us peer review the inputs that we've had, check the structure and put it in a presentable form with some key discussion questions, so that then it can come back to us identifying the gaps. We could fill those gaps, then take it to our executive and council for their comment and endorsement to go out for public consultation. So engaging a consultant this financial year in June to help us do that work, to review the document, all of our ideas we've put in there to date, and bring it together in a presentable form is what we would like to do to take us to the next step. Basically, everything else is covered in that quick draft of what would go into an acquisition plan, and I'm happy to answer any questions on what you think about that approach.
Has anybody got any questions or thoughts? Before anybody, oh no, Nathan.
Yeah, just firstly, sorry I'm late, but I actually saw that email come through today, Tim, but unfortunately I wasn't able to get into it. I'm not sure what happened. Yeah, just that link for the Google drop, the paper that you were passing through. Yeah, I haven't been able to view it. Were you the same, Paul?
Yeah, I couldn't open it. I tried a couple of times today and I couldn't open it.
Yeah. So I haven't actually had a look at it, but I don't know if it's worth talking us through on a screen share. Is that possible?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, I don't know, like with time constraints and everything like that. So I didn't mean to step on those, but yeah.
When I first tried to open it, it wouldn't open. And then if I clicked up the top and opened it using Google Docs, that then allowed, because it was kind of missing the first page or something. When I first tried to look at it, it was playing up, but that's the same document anyway.
Even if we don't, is this 5.5.1? It is, isn't it? I'll just open that one and I'll share my screen so you can have a look at it. even if we don't, sorry, Catherine?
No, you go.
Even if we don't decide on it completely tonight, if we could sort of maybe tackle it out of session, that would be good. I'll just see if I can share my screen for it. So I think it's that one. Can you see that?
This is the 10-year renewables.
Oh, okay, wrong one, sorry.
Yeah.
All right, I'll stop that share and I'll try and find the actual one I was talking about. I wonder if I've mixed them up now. 5.9.2. Peer review of the draft. Okay, so I'll reshare the screen. Okay, look, so even if we don't decide, I can talk you through. Yeah, and now I've just lost it. So here we go. Can you see it now?
Yep, that's it.
Okay, so quickly, I just went back and had a look at the terms of reference, which says what we're here to do is to develop a climate emergency action plan and one that reflects community aspirations. We agreed on the structure. The outcome that I was seeking from this meeting, or maybe shortly after this meeting, is that we provide suggestions on the gaps in what is required of the consultant, because we're going to go to a consultant and ask them to help us polish this document and endorse that staff engage the consultant to undertake the task to peer review the draft CAP in accordance with the project scope. So then what I did was I described what we required from the town of Gawler in terms of the plan that we had a draft. It was delayed by the COVID-19. This consultancy is needed to peer review and bring things together. And then I provided the background to the document and sort of compared it against what's been done in other places. So we've modelled our CAP largely on the town of Darebin, but we're a much tinier council than the town of Darebin. So I noted those key differences, that we're much smaller, plus we don't have 10 years of background in working in this space, so we don't have renewable energy targets and all of those other things that those bigger councils have already established over a long period of time. We're starting from, we've made some good progress on establishing renewables on our sites and doing some other things, but we're starting from a fairly low baseline, and we have to recognise that. So our plan is going to be naturally, shorter and tighter, and talking about what we're going to do in the future as we work through the actions. I've got some finance considerations and some evaluation criteria mentioned in here that, with the consultants going to come on board and help us, we really need them to have knowledge and experience on climate change action plans and related climate change and risk vulnerability planning. So they need to have that skill. They need to have knowledge and experience in greenhouse gas mitigation. And not all consultants have that, because there's been a huge push in the climate adaptation space in South Australia, not so much in the reducing emissions space. And then the last part of it was skills in preparing climate documents for a public audience of both, that will, including those with a general interest and those with a more technical and advanced interest as well. So we need to cover both camps when we prepare the document. That was broadly what I put out for discussion, and I apologise for it being so late. So if we don't actually get to providing all the comments on it today, we can work through a process, I hope, to get comments back over the next few days, and then we'll come back and see that everyone's happy with how to move forward.
Yep.
Having read it, I can say that I'm pretty comfortable with everything there. I'd also like to communicate to the group that in an in-principle manner, we have management support for a spend on this particular issue. So we've kind of checked in with them, and they've said, yes, that makes sense, and they're comfortable with us spending the money in this manner. Yeah, I was pretty comfortable with that, and Yeah, is other people read it or have any comments or concerns?
I had a brief look over it this afternoon prior to the meeting, and yeah, I was pretty happy with it. Kind of covered everything that we've kind of discussed over the past few months and our goals. So yeah, I'm happy with it.
Okay, great. Are there? I'm just trying to think. I mean, ideally, we could resolve this in this meeting. But
Councillor Shanks just has his hand up for Catherine.
Oh, has he? Oh, okay, I didn't see that. Sorry. Go for it.
No, that's all right. I just have we shortlisted some of the preferred consultants? Do we know who we actually would want to engage if we do take this direction, or are we still in expression of interest phase?
We haven't even got that far, have we? I think this is the first step.
No, we haven't gone to market. We haven't approached anyone. We know that there's possibly 3, maybe 4 of the consultancies in South Australia that have the skills to do this, and we would probably go to them with a request for quote.
So we're probably wanting to get direction on this on somewhere like tonight, because if we're going, it's the 20th of May now.
Yeah.
Winning that engagement before the end of June, we probably want to start that tender process now. Is that what we're thinking?
Yeah, and also I think it's important to keep in mind that this is a piece of work that will help us get an excellent draft. It's not about the final version. So there's the risk is reduced, I think, from a process perspective, in that this is about presenting a very good draft. It's not about the final version.
Well, I'd be happy to resolve this tonight, but I'm in everyone else's hands.
Yeah, does anybody else have any particular concerns, or if we propose to do that, or that they want more time to read the document, or Tim?
Look, I'd just suggest that even if we resolve this in principle tonight, it wouldn't stop people coming back in the next few days with their suggestions on the document and improving it. So that opportunity is still there.
Yeah. Okay.
And Councillor Kosh.
I'm not seeing those hands for some reason.
Okay.
I've got at the moment. Very sorry, Paul. Yeah, Jack, you're gonna have to keep your eye on it for me.
Okay.
Paul, fire away.
Sorry, yeah, I've lost myself, but anyway, that's okay. Where am I? No, Tim, is this any different? I would have liked to actually read it. Is it much different to what you had a couple of weeks ago?
This is a newly drafted document, so it just brings together, I think, the concepts and ideas of where we were going. So it's consistent with what we agreed at the last meeting, that we would develop the draft, get it peer reviewed, then go out for consultation. But it's new text.
Oh, okay, but if the message is the same, basically, it's just bits and well, I was quite happy with it last time, so I'm quite happy to support it tonight if that's what people want, but still with the caveat that we might want to comment once we get to open it and have a look at it as well.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. Yeah, I mean, we can improve the document as we go on, but if everybody's comfortable, I think we can at least agree to take the next step on this process, that we're happy for the staff to go on with this process.
I mean, I would agree with that, because I think we've already, it's gone down a fair way, and most people have had an opportunity to comment, and it was a pretty good document when I first read it, and I made some comments, and hopefully they got in. But,
it certainly hasn't diverged from any of our conversations. There's nothing that's especially new. There's nothing that's missing, in my opinion, from our previous conversations.
Yep,
okay. Anybody else? Are there any hands up that I'm missing, Jack? Since the screen share thing it was going.
Councillor Shanks.
I just wanted to ask, did my comments get through? It was the first time I've actually used Google Docs, and I was just going through and drafting as I saw. Did they actually come through, or?
Are you talking about the plan? Yes, they did. They did, Nathan. I saw your comments. Yeah.
No worries.
Yeah.
Still working.
And I'm not sure how you wanted to treat this, because you kind of skipped on to the second part, Tim. But the first part of this was the conversation around encouraging everybody to actually input their thoughts. Now, we are a working group, so it's not about just an expectation of staff to create the document for us. There's every opportunity for us as every member to contribute actual text into the document. And I think Tim and Jack and I would really encourage everybody to do that. Tim, I think we had a talk about setting some timeframes and deadlines so that we can start giving people a deadline to work towards. So I think you and I need to do that. That was something we need to kind of fix up. But we were very, very keen for people to all their energy around all their wonderful ideas to do with climate that is relevant for Gawler, put it in the document. Like, don't leave good stuff out. We actually want it in the document that we can go forward with.
Yeah, and we are trying to sort of develop a bit of a structure. I forget how it goes, but a bit of a background or where we're at now, what the goal or the aspiration might be, and what the strategy or steps might be to get where we want to go. So if you've got an idea, if you can just put it in a simple structure, a bit like that. If it has to be a case study, put it in a box. But I would really welcome that we capture all of your ideas. Every one of us has got different skills and knowledge in different areas. So that gives us the opportunity to put things in and see where they land. If it can go straight in, we'll put it straight in. If we have to discuss it, we'll discuss it. And it certainly, as a coordinator of this, I'd be looking to resolve some of the comments along the side. So where we've tried to address them, can we try and resolve them and take them out? Because at the end of the day, we want a clean document and we really want the text inside the document rather than in the outside. But you've got to go through putting comments in the outside before you get there, of course. So it'd be really great if over the next week, 2 weeks at the latest, we have all our ideas in there so that we're ready to take this document to a consultant.
That's great. Thanks, Tim. Just in terms of making sure that we wrap up the decision on pressing go on the procurement of a consultant, was there anybody who had any concerns? I just wanted to double check that before we leave this point. Okay, so no concerns have been raised with me. So, okay, that's great. Tim, have you finished with this part? Is it time to move on to the next one?
Yes, I think so.
Do we need to vote on that? Need to...
I was assuming that was a unanimous if nobody was dissenting, Paul. Sorry. Would you like to do a proper, yeah? Okay. Okay, so do you have voting buttons or something? Is that how it works here? Or?
Yeah.
Okay, well, perhaps if we just leave everybody who agrees raise their hand.
Have we got a motion?
Can we have a mover and a seconder?
Have we got a motion? Was there a motion there as well?
All I've got at the moment is that...
I can suggest a motion.
Yeah.
Right.
Could I suggest the motion?
Yeah.
The motion will be to subject to members having the opportunity to make comment on the document and agreeing on the document, that Jack and I prepare an acquisition plan and go to market for the peer review of the draft climate emergency action plan.
Yeah, I'm happy to second that because it puts two things. One, the process of the acquisition, and two, just a little bit more review and input. So it's got two elements. Yep.
Megan, how'd you go?
I've got subject to members having the opportunity to comment on the document, that Jack and Tim prepare an acquisition plan.
Maybe just officers. Jack and Tim sounds a bit casual.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm happy to move that because it does move things along and does give people an opportunity to have a last look at the document, because we haven't been able to open it recently.
Yeah, we've had some technical issues.
Yep.
Could
After prepare an acquisition plan in the motion?
Yes.
Yes.
What's the rest of it?
To engage a consultant.
Could I also maybe suggest, Tim, that we just email the document to all the members tonight as well?
Yeah. That'd be good.
At the end, so you just comes through as an email. If Google Docs is being problematic, and then any commentary can come just straight back.
Good idea.
Okay.
Yep.
Sure.
Okay, thank you,
Do we have a mover?
Paul.
Paul?
Thank you, Paul.
Seconder?
I'll put my hand up.
Oh, lovely. Thank you, Jack. And everybody in favour?
Can we use the yes buttons maybe on our?
I don't have yes buttons.
You need to click on participants.
Oh,
That's in
right.
the participants window, and then there's a raise hand, yes.
Oh,
no.
right. Okay,
Got it.
cool.
Green tick.
So that's when I was clicking to raise my hand before. So
Oh. Normally sorry. Normally they were popping up and I was catching them, but I did hit itself. Okay, all right. So we're all happy. That's wonderful to see.
Thank you for educating us, Megan.
Thank you, Megan.
Megan.
Okay, all right.
Okay,
Wonderful.
I'm going to share my screen again if we're ready to move on to the heat mapping.
Yes, please. Yeah.
I've just got so many screens open now, I don't really know what I'm looking at.
So while Tim's sorting it out, I think.
Screen one, it tells me.
Oh, no, it starts sharing. Very good.
So we're on there. So look, I thought I would go in from the starting point, and this is about item LiDAR and heat mapping. Now, very sadly, we've got the LiDAR, we've received the mapping, but for me to show it to you, I need to have it installed on my machine. I need to approach IT, have some training. So it's all taking a little bit longer than I'd hoped. So I can't bring you the LiDAR tonight, but what I thought it might be worth just showing you is where we're going to get to with it, I hope, is something similar to the heat mapping that we did with Resilient East and Salisbury and all of the other climate regions. And I've even had a bit of a complaint from our people here at Gawler that it's not really friendly, it's not really provided on a friendly interface. And I had this same complaint when I was at Resilient East, and I approached the science and innovation team at DEW, and that was when we all collaborated and got together, and DEW donated this online mapping tool at the value of $40,000, and we got it so that everybody, including the public, could access it. So if you can see my screen, I'm just going to go into the urban heat mapping home from Enviro Data SA that I've accessed by looking at Google Drive, okay? And I've got a few notes here for myself because am I at the proper screen now? Yeah, okay. So the main thing to look for is this thing here called Launch Map Viewer. And then sitting below that is the Idiot's Guide, Quick Start Guide. That's really important too when you can't find out what to do. But like all men, reading a guide at the start is too hard. So we just launch straight into it, and it's got this Launch Map Viewer for us. And then it goes into an online spatial mapping tool. And it's thinking about it. Actually, I've already got one set up, so I could probably close this one. In fact, I might be confusing it by opening two.
Is this the one that cuts off before Gawler? Like it doesn't quite get to Gawler?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that was
I'll
sad.
just do it again because it stopped. Normally it's flashing and doing things. It doesn't like it. Oh, hang on, no, we're there. So then we come to this screen and it puts all of the logos of all of the councils that have participated. So it really was a great collaborative effort to get it done. And one of the things behind it was really, if we're going to tackle climate change together, if we're going to tackle urban forestry together and urban heat, and report every 5 years on the State of the Environment report, we need good tools to do it. So then it takes you to this tool where you can zoom in. It shows the heat mapping for the regions that it covers, and you'll see the poor old Fido, the dog up at Gawler, he's missing. one of the first things I do here is I go to layers, or you can also find a suburb. You can do a whole lot of things here, but I go to layers first, and I actually select the region that I want. So in this one, I'm just going to select, because I don't want it to go too slowly, I'm going to turn off Resilient South, and I'm going to turn off Adapt West. So I'm just up here in this corner where we are now. I'm going to expand on the heat mapping here by hitting the plus button so I can see a little bit more. And you'll see that what we did was we did heat mapping in the day, and we also did heat mapping at night. And they give you two different results. When you're looking at heat mapping, it's really important to understand that in the daytime, it's reflecting heat and absorbing heat, but at nighttime, it's re-releasing the heat that's been absorbed in the daytime. So very quickly, when the sun goes down, you lose a lot of the heat from the really thin surfaces, from the thin rooftops and from the thin grass blades and things like that. And then what you're left with is the re-release of the heat that's been absorbed during the daytime. And it's that heat at night, which is a real problem during heat waves, which makes it difficult for people to sleep and affects the elderly and really affects people without air conditioning. So then you can zoom in and drill down. You can scroll and all of those things. You just have to give it a bit of time to catch up. You can go right down. There was one suburb earlier today I was looking at with Jack, a new suburb up near Golden Grove, or where you saw a whole suburb of white roofs next to a whole suburb of black roofs, and you turn on the heat mapping, and boy, it really shows. It really shows the difference that was made. I don't know where, I might even have it just, I might even have fluked it right now. So if you look at this heat map, now it's got this other magical little tool. Watch where I've got the cursor, and I'm going to slide the heat map on and off. And that's brilliant. So you can look at your house and your rooftop, and you can slide it on and off to see what your urban heat is like on your own little household property. Or we can do it in a car park, or we can do it where the councils are looking at where they should plant trees, or a whole lot of other things. There's a million and one uses for it. You can all.
Tim, I was just going to add, you've got it on the night setting.
The night
just
one,
put
yeah.
it put it onto the day setting.
Yep.
And then just try it again, because then it'll really.
So look at what happens with these lovely white roofs. You've got a suburb here with white roofs. You've got a suburb here with black roofs, and you've got a suburb here of really mixed, slightly older roofs. And look at what happens when we turn up the heat mapping. All the white roofs are cool.
It doesn't seem to be. You may just have to refresh the screen to get it into the day map.
That's better, isn't it, Jack?
There it is. That's better.
So now it's, you sometimes have to boot it to click over into the right one. We were looking at the nighttime temperature. So now we're in the daytime. You can see that all the white roofs are reflecting all the heat. So they're all quite cool in that little suburb here. All the dark roofs down in this one here, they're absorbing all of the heat, and they're really hot. And then over here, it's a mixed bunch.
That's an awesome 2 pictures that should be side by side in the report somewhere, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the other things is to understand what happens with bare dirt and with grass. So bare dirt is really hot, and it keeps the heat during the night and slowly re-releases it. A lot of the time, grasses are seen as really bad because you see dry grass and it looks quite hot during the day. But actually, as soon as the sun goes down, if it's got a good layer of grass on there, it suddenly loses all that heat, and the ground beneath is actually much cooler because it actually acts as an insulator. So heat mapping, reading heat maps is a bit of an art form. You can't just go into it and make rash decisions to bulldoze over a row of trees or something else, because you've got to appreciate that things get averaged out over roads, and you've got to look at the resolution. That was why we went down to a 2 meter resolution on this. So we're looking at things that are really just a little bit bigger than your arm width, a pixel that's not much bigger than your arm spans. A great tool to use, and I hope that we start to think about how we can use it going forward as we develop and implement our climate emergency action plan. And the LiDAR is going to give us the same sort of information in a different sort of information, but in a similar way as well. I just thought I'd run through that for you. That's all I've got to show.
Tim, is that something that the council had to just nominate itself for, or how did you actually get that to happen?
We got the heat mapping done at Resilient East, and I approached Juna and we had many great conversations. And I just forget the chap's name. Sorry, I forget his name, but there's a really great team in there. And we said that it's crazy that we're all spending far too much doing things separately. Let's actually do it together and have a strategic approach to spatial mapping, heat mapping, LiDAR, and all of the rest of it. And then bring it together through the work of the state government to have it in one centralised place where the whole of community can access it.
But Tim, is this something that, I mean, because it stops before Gawler and we're talking about getting Gawler included in the next run or something? Is that what?
You can probably blame me for that too, in that at Resilient East, I was dealing with 8 councils. I reached out to Salisbury and Playford and tried to take on 2 more. I got managed to get Salisbury across the line, didn't succeed with Playford, and I didn't think to knock on the door at Gawler. However, next time around, before 2022, we've got to do all of this again. We can get Gawler involved and we can do it for a fraction of the price compared with $110,000 that we paid from Resilient East to do it. We should be able to get it for less than $10,000.
Okay, so that's something that we should have in the plan in terms of a future action, is to make sure that that's facilitated.
Yeah, I think so.
If we can, yeah. Okay, all right. Thank you, Tim. Any other questions or comments from everybody? And
Councillor Shanks.
So I'm mute myself there. I just had a technical question. I always knew about the white roof, the dark roof, and everything like that. It's so good to sort of see it that easily. What if those white roofs had solar panels on them? How would that show up?
I actually did a fair bit of asking and questioning about that, because solar panels are quite dark, but it is the case that they're taking electricity out and sunlight out and converting that to electricity and removing that from the solar panel, and that does make a difference. More detailed research needs to go into just how much difference that makes, but largely speaking, if you've got solar panels on your roof, you're actually creating a heat barrier anyway. The solar panels are elevated above the roof by 2 or 3 50 millimeters or so or more, and that actually has a huge cooling effect on your roof anyway.
It'd just be really interesting to see, looking at that, how it is right now, hypothetically that white suburb all had 6 kilowatt solar systems on there. How would that look in comparison to the dark roofs next door? You know, that's just something that's interesting. You know, it'd be very sort of good to be able to flag that as well.
But I think this is one of the benefits of heat mapping, is that already you're starting to ask the right questions. When you start looking at vegetation, you start to ask the right questions about vegetation and tree canopy and tree planting and colours of roofs and cooler roads and pavers and all of those things. It all creates the discussion and the knowledge that we need.
Yeah, fantastic.
Wonderful, thank you. Any other questions or comments before we move on? No, okay.
Councillor Kosh.
Oh, sorry. I had to open up and everything. Sorry, Paul. I just didn't see.
Now, Tim, you talked about the grasses. Is that grasslands or is that lawn?
You know, lawn, anything you put water on is cool. So lawns have typically got water transpiring out, so they're generally quite cool. I was talking about dead, dry grasses when I was making that reference. Okay,
well, that's good, because there's sometimes we all think we just have to plant trees. We actually have, I think you actually have to plant a variety of plants, you know, grasses, shrubs, etc. So you're actually creating habitats more than just trees, because trees sort of block everything else out. Yeah, I just want to make, just that comment about, looking at more than just trees, but actually vegetation, native grasses do it, have a great benefit as well.
And don't plant astroturf, because on a 35-degree astroturf is probably like to be 75 degrees Celsius.
Oh yeah.
And then the kids' playground, the softball playground, that's likely to be 82 degrees Celsius from the work that I've done.
Oh yeah, you burn your
Lovely.
Look, one last final thing before I go. Up here on the right-hand side, see there's a little address box, so you can type in your address there and go to your address if you live in an area covered by the mapping, and that goes straight there. One thing to remember though is once you go into an address box, it takes you into a different area, and then you get hopelessly lost in a find function. So always remember to go back out, go back into layers, and go back to the general tools. So if you hit the general tools and the layers and go back to the heat mapping, you're always in a safe place.
Thanks, Tim. Wonderful.
Yep, good.
Okay, all right. Sounds like there's no more questions on that one. So moving on to 5.4. Jack or Tim?
This one is the idea on the signage strategy for Gawler's pathways and use of the Gawler app. We started to progress that. I've sent one email, and there's an agreement that we need to have a further discussion, but that hasn't happened yet. I'm sorry. So that one has to roll over again. I regret that I'm not getting to all of these, but it's just where we're at.
Thanks, Tim. Okay.
Look, one more. I think I did put it in the CEA. I think I did put it in the plan.
Okay, great. 5.5, council staff report. Jack or Tim?
Yep, renewables. Look, so similar to the one on the going to market on the Climate Emergency Action Plan, we've been talking about what we do with renewables, and we've put it in the Climate Emergency Action Plan that we would like to have a feasibility project that works out a strategy to move forward so that we can have a 5 or a 10-year program of work. That we've spoken with a number of experts. We've spoken to Tom and Rachel, we've spoken to Annie Legrand from Salisbury, and a number of other subject matter experts in this area, and they've pretty much confirmed with us that it will be such a big task, we can't just launch into the big project straight away. So they've suggested that we work on developing the scope for the larger project as the first step, which would do some preliminary feasibility around what options might be. We might narrow down so that we go to the market as an intelligent customer, basically. And what we would like to do is bring together a group of people that can help us in making this scope, and we might also take that to the market and get a specialist to help us bring that scope together, so that then we can confidently prepare the acquisition plan and a scope of works for the second stage of the project. So this renewables feasibility project that I'm talking in 5.5.1, there is an attachment as well. I'm not asking you to sort of approve that tonight, but I think we need to get onto it fairly soon anyway. So I'd welcome your feedback on that, what you think about the way forward. It's a bit hard to sort of ask for a decision when some of you haven't even seen what I'm talking about yet. So be useful if you read through it first.
That's a good background, Tim. I'm just thinking, would pathway be, because we don't want to wait until the next meeting, I suspect. We would really like to get this done out of session if we can, I think. Yeah. So perhaps Jack and Tim could get back to us with what is an appropriate mechanism to be able to do that, and a time frame that you want people to get back to you on that, because I'm very conscious of the time ticking away, and it would be good to get this this first step done as quickly as is sensible.
I think most of the groundwork we've sort of commenced in this space. It's again what you've just said, Catherine. How do we get together and actually drive it forward and agree on, in principle, you know, what are the targets or the areas that we want to sort of work towards. So that's going to be very critical from where Tim and I sit. And you know, that's something we can discuss and then just bring it back to everyone and get people's thoughts on, you know, what everyone thinks about moving forward and how to address it. So I don't know if that makes sense or...
Yeah.
Paul's putting as well, so yeah.
I was just thinking that I suppose it's about, is the timeline critical enough that we need to address this before the next meeting, in your opinion?
Tim, just refresh my memory. We're looking for 21-22. Is that right for budget deliverables on this?
Sadly, Jack, I think this is another one where we've got some budget left over this year that we need to spend, and we may not have the money next year. We might be able to use, I understand there's a $20,000 allowance next year for the Climate Emergency Action Plan to continue. That's all. And we might be able to use some of that, but then we'll need that for other things as well. So if we can get started and use and get that out the door before June 30, we would be in the best situation.
Okay, so again, we go back to, yes, there will be a time frame on there. If we look at doing this in part and then going through, you know, like the work that Tim's prepared, an acquisition plan and going out to market, then we don't have much time at all.
Can we schedule?
Councillor Kosh was wanting to speak as well. Sorry.
Yeah.
I just want to clarify. So this is a model where you look at the feasibility of different projects. Is that what you're looking at?
Not yet.
No, what we're actually wanting to do is to develop the scope of works that would then go out to the market on options to investigate further.
So these would be quite large strategic type projects, I would have thought. Yeah.
It's just many years ago, one of my roles was an economic development officer, and I used to write business plans, like doing feasibility studies and business plans, and the number of projects that could be just wiped out in 10 minutes if you did a little feasibility study was amazing. So I'm just concerned I just know from experience that's a lot of stuff, you know, if you just do some quick calculations, all of a sudden they just don't become viable at all. And I used to knock them out really quickly just by just going through them whether it's feasible or not. You know, you just go through it and that saved a lot of energy, a lot of time, and a lot of angst for everybody, really.
Well, it might be possible that we can do that ourselves as a first step in this draft process, but yeah. I certainly feel that we need specialist help that know their way around some of the issues. And if you haven't had a chance to look at the document yet, there's quite a few elements in it that Tim and Jack have outlined that I'm confident that I need expert help. And I think but yeah, I totally agree with you, Paul, in that I think there's some stuff that's kind of no-brainers that we're probably able to make the shortlist. But yeah, that can be part of the process in terms of this.
What we've been warned about is whether if we go to the market and say how long is a piece of string with regard to renewable energy, we'll end up with many things that are too big and we won't be sure of the size and scale and our role. So this was about developing, well, what would be appropriate for developing renewable power on Town of Gawler sites. But then also wants to extend that and say, well, what would be appropriate if we went to a bigger model? We went to something that we did on a different site and went into partnerships and purchased the power back. And what would be something if we used a different model to develop, you know, to create a retailer company and to create renewable energy elsewhere and into partnerships and create a, you know, something like a Norma to manage it. Now, they're all quite complex questions, and we can't just go to the market and say, give us an answer on this, because the question is really complex as well. So by getting the panel of experts around to help us draft up the scope of works, we're hoping to go to the market with questions that a provider could understand and that they could respond to and investigate.
Tim, I was thinking, can we perhaps if this is an appropriate pathway, schedule a separate Zoom meeting for everybody to attend as soon as we can that is only dealing with this item. And you can be very clear on what the motion is and what the document is, and everybody can have time to digest it, and we can, you know, spend just a meeting on that if that's a pathway that people feel is appropriate and gives them enough opportunity to contribute. What do people think, Jack?
Would it be worthwhile for Tim and I just to, and maybe Catherine, if you want to get involved and really just drive the key issues first and then put it out to the group for a meeting? Or did you want to sort of approach it more like a bit of a think tank?
Well, I think it certainly needs, I think we need to define what the outcomes are, because time's of the essence. So we need to define what the outcomes are that we're seeking from the group. But then obviously the conversation can you know, cover whatever is needed to be covered at the time.
Well, I support that suggestion, Catherine. It would be really great if people could have a look and provide feedback on what they think might be missing or what their views might be. Then Jack and I can incorporate that into, you know, a clearer document and process, and then we can come back to you through a Zoom meeting and talk that through.
Yeah, because I'd hate it to be held up for a month or something. I mean, that's just not going to work, is it? So, okay. Has anybody got their hands up or waving at me that I can't see?
Yeah.
Oh, Paul, great.
Yeah, I'd just like to see the model that Tim and talking about. As that previous role I had, sometimes you get people who are very excited about something and will tell you everything, and they're, you know, over enthusiastic, and that's when, you know, and you go, oh, that's a good idea, without actually stepping back, you know, independently looking at something and just seeing where it's viable, feasible, right.
Paul, I think that's the point of this first step.
That's what I want to see the model. I actually want to see the model, because what was just said then was different to what was said.
Well, we're not proposing any particular model, and I think this process is to have somebody who only has the council and the community's interests at heart. They're not trying to sell us any particular model or anything like that. So they're like an expert ally in the process that helps us define how to ask the market for what we want.
But you might decide that it's not easy right from the start, because somebody could be trying to sell you a concept, and then go, okay, right, yeah, and then all of a sudden you spend all this time researching.
Certainly, yeah, for sure, yeah. I'm sure that we can tease all that out in the subsequent meeting, because that will be presented, and we will have time dedicated for that and really dig into it. I think that's excellent. Tom, I saw you had your hand.
Have a read of the document. This whole process is to protect against exactly what you were talking about.
Okay, yeah, I probably need to read the document, but
but that's fine. Yeah, no worries. And Tom, I can see that you've raised your hand.
Yeah, I wanted to use the same word you just mentioned. It's pathway. So I apologize for not putting much effort in contributing to the document. I will make sure I put my bobs in. And yes, I think we can create a vision for Gola, and that could have the goals and a path how to achieve them. And, you know, part of the sort of evaluation in terms of the numerals is just one of the sort of elements of that sort of vision that we will create for our community. So that's kind of what I would like to add
Lovely.
in this conversation. Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to discuss? Is everybody okay if we schedule another meeting at a time that suits people, and we just discuss this first step of this process? And what we're talking about is about getting an expert to protect us against and help us make the best decisions. And the decisions that we're making is around a model for energy for our buildings. It's not everything. It's just around the segment of our pie chart, which is to do with the stationary energy. That's right, isn't it, Tim?
Yeah, it's largely for the council operations, covering the council electricity use.
Okay.
If there happens to be some stumbling of an idea that you could partner with others, and those others might include the community, we'll deal with that when we get there. So I'm not going to rule anything out, but it's aimed at meeting the council's electricity use.
Yeah, great.
Okay.
And you know, there may be multiple ways of doing it, and ways of doing that may involve the community. Yeah. So, okay. Is there any other questions or comments before we move on?
I put my hand up.
Oh, Tom, yes. Sorry.
I'm in a bit of a pickle, you know, like I've been working in the energy industry over 12 years now. And because if I want to be part of the tender process, I'm not allowed to contribute to the discussion. That's kind of what I was told.
Mm.
So, or Jack.
It's important for probity that we follow whatever rules are associated with it. And we need to perhaps seek, you know, particular advice if that's the case. But also equally, my understanding is that it's not problematic if the tendering process is completely separate. So you may have had input into what goes into that, but then the tendering process is a separate process, and that's the one where the probity issues are particularly important. And obviously we need to do everything by the book, but there are two separate parts to this, and it's the tender process that you need to be, if you want to, you know, tender for these things. That's the procurement process is the critical part that you need to be. But advice that you give us as a community member in these preliminary stages, I mean, there's certainly about identifying conflicts of interest that you've identified now. So if you and Jack, we can take some advice on that and make sure that we're doing it all the right way. But I think there's time yet before we get to that point.
I think I've got the history about it.
Paul.
Yeah, there is the Local Government Act, and I think to do with material conflicts, and I think it probably you have to be very, very careful, even at this early stage, I would suggest. So I would be getting some advice fairly early on. Yeah, it gets very serious.
Yeah, Jack and Tim, is that something that we can get some clear advice that we can circulate? Because we are starting to get down to that part of the process where we're starting to do promote real projects or recommend real projects or get real work done. So yeah, we're getting to the time of the process that we have to, you know, make sure that this is very, very clear in the group.
Quite easily, I'll talk to our governance team and get some information from them, and then we can circulate it amongst the group. But as Paula said, council sort of does this quite a bit, so we'll get the section out of the Local Government Act, and then we'll just let everyone know from there. Yeah,
just on that, Nathan and Cody and I are all public officers, so we've got a level of concern and responsibility that we have to take into account.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Paul.
Yep.
Is there anything else on this bit before we move on? Anybody got?
Councillor Shanks.
Oh, yeah, wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just on conflict as well. I think you'll get to a point where you'll know whether or not this will be a material, like it'll benefit your bank account or not. And I'm pretty confident that that Jack and Tim will be able to flag that sort of stuff with you. But I also don't want to lose your information just because you know, the erring on the side of caution thing is definitely something to do. But yeah, I think you'll know anyway.
And we'll get advice on you know, where that line is so that we can apply that. Wonderful.
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Wonderful.
5.2.2. 5.5.2, sorry, Jack. Okay, electric vehicle update. Look, I'm really pleased that we've set a date for the ACV cargo team have been generous enough to offer to bring out a little electric vehicle that we can have a look at. We've set a date, we're planning to have that down at the Sports and Community Centre on the 11th of June. I don't know if I've invited you all yet. I probably haven't. We were just trying to get the dates locked in. But we do plan to invite all of you guys, the executive team and elected members, to come along and have a look, and anybody else that's really interested in them. Paul?
I just want to say, I actually saw a prototype of this vehicle at a conference in Britain about 1.5 years ago, and yeah, it's really worthwhile looking at. And it's an Australian company. They're importing the shells from China, but assembling them in Adelaide. So yeah, it's probably the first Australian manufactured car in a long time. So yeah, it's quite exciting.
Yeah, so my interest in this is one of pure selfish greed. I'd really like to see one commenced as a trial in Gawler as soon as we can. We're not sure when that will happen because they have not even built yet. But there are cars coming up which are due for replacement in the environment team, and a lot of the environment and health officers have indicated their strong interest in trialling one and having a look. So this is all about getting people thinking about it, getting them comfortable with the idea, looking at it as an opportunity. And then we still need to do the hard work, which is the next part of it, is undertaking the life cycle assessment of them. And some of that has been offered from within some of our staff arrangements with a company called Unico, but it's kind of stalled a bit. And I think I'm at the point where I'm going to run a parallel process and work with the state government to help us with the life cycle assessment, because we need to get runs on the board. As everyone's mentioned, time is marching on. So we need to get a good comparison of the EV compared to its equivalent and see if we can put up a good case as to exactly how much more it costs and why we shouldn't be trialling it sooner rather than later.
Nathan?
Yeah, I just had a bit of a thought. Knowing how much knowledge Paul has in the electric car sort of thing, I was sort of thinking like, just spitballing here, but how good would it be if we had a pretty basic review from someone like Paul on the electric car that was, based on he goes down and has a look. The elected members come down and have a look, and then Paul has a little bit of a Paul's thing around electric cars, and it ticks this box, ticks this box, ticks this box, because I'm sure you would have a bit of knowledge in that space.
Oh yeah, I mean, I could tell you, but it was a usable vehicle or feasible quickly.
Yeah, that's right. You could just a very simplified sort of document that gets circulated a bit by us, and it's Paul's thoughts. Or,
I could look at the charging mechanisms and all that sort of stuff.
That sounds great.
Even better, I wonder if we could incorporate the views of the staff who would be potentially using that for running around doing their parking duties or for looking at health impacts or other things. If they can have their input into that process as well, and if that's positive, then we're actually getting more of a story there than just one set of eyes.
Yeah. It does make me think, I wonder if we could perhaps invite or send an invite out through some other community groups, depending on, size limitations and what's possible. Yeah. But some specific reps from groups like the Gawler Business Association and things like that. There might be some other networks that we can tap into and get, depending on numbers, obviously.
Yeah.
Quickly, ATA had a forum on Monday night, and it was called "So You Want to Buy an Electric Car." Two of my friends were the speakers, and they basically talked about owning a car and how it fitted into their lives and everything else. And all the questions were just around that. Very interesting questions, but people just wanted to know how it worked and how it fitted into their lives. So.
I'm hearing this needs to go into the plan.
I know.
This is an action. The council's going to recommend some webinars or whatever.
I just love electric cars. It's the way of the future, and getting more excited.
Yeah. Fantastic.
That's what would be really great to sort of harness that and simplify, but have that knowledge. Bring everyone along for the ride. That's attractive.
I think a lot of things. To sell a lot of things, you just need to talk to someone who's done it. In the a lot of areas, and that's what I found.
You know what, Paul? I totally agree, and I think that is exactly the same as the community energy and the model process. It all sounds opaque to us because we're not very familiar with it, but as soon as you have an expert who knows their stuff and they can go, oh yeah, look, there's this and it's that and it's easy or it's hard or watch out for that bit, it makes such a difference.
Yeah, it's explaining the mutual benefits. That's what it boils down to.
Fantastic. That's very exciting. Looking forward to it.
Me too.
See you there.
Yeah.
Okay, lovely.
We're on 5.3.3 next.
Sorry, just put my hand up at the last.
Oh, sorry. Oh, Jack, yes.
Oh, sorry.
I was going to ask, there was a comment about sort of getting the staff that would potentially be driving these vehicles, if we procure them. I was just wondering, if we could take those points as in sort of with that whole sort of engaging the Town of Gawler Council staff with the benefits of these types of practices and sort of the other elements that come with electric vehicles and sustainable transport. Is that something that we could potentially look into?
Like a staff survey.
Almost, yeah. They'll see the car, get an idea of what it's all about, and they'll learn about the benefits from the demonstration, but also the other elements that come with it, sort of the understanding of where the emissions of their petrol cars, stuff like that, as well as just general council usage and general office usage. It's a good sort of foot in the door with that element that we're talking about a few meetings ago.
Would you be able to maybe put some of your thoughts about how that might happen in real terms and maybe send it to Tim and Jack and they can kind of incorporate those aspects into the day?
Sure. No,
is that what you're thinking?
Yeah. Something to understand and sort of provoke their thinking as well, so that they leave it sort of understanding and sort of with that immediate sort of focus on sort of sustainability once they sort of finish the demonstrations.
Sure. Yeah. So in terms of anything specific that you're thinking of, like the particular actions that you are recommending, then I'm sure that would be helpful for them.
Sure.
Yeah, it would be good to document some of the views and some of the understandings and perhaps how much people have got out of the day, whether they've learned something as well. So
I'm kind of thinking a little video would be great, like kind of, videoing people's reactions, even just with a phone or something. That could be a bit of fun. But
yeah.
A follow-up interviewing someone like Paul Kosh on his thoughts,
Exactly.
That'd be beautiful.
Do you think they'll change?
No. We don't think your views will change.
No, I don't think so. The vehicle. And in fact, I know the lady that's ordered number 1.
Really? Oh, wow. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
What if we had a before and after sort of survey? Their thoughts on electric vehicles and the benefits,
nice one.
Provide them, and then afterwards, we can then understand how easily or tough it is to change people's minds.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
You have to do the before survey, email it to people before they arrive, so they hand it in, and then repeat it afterwards.
Yeah,
maybe.
Cool. That's great.
Okay, should we go on to the next one now?
Yes, 5.5.3.
So on the Gawler emissions update, I'm not actually going to go through the actual emissions today, but what I'm going to do is just talk about some of the work that we're doing to improve our emissions accounting. And one of the things that we, Jack and I, are pretty pleased about is that we've renewed Trellis for 2020 and 2021, but we've actually incorporated some new things. So here's the table from the contract here. I'll read it out, Paul.
Okay.
But what we're going to get is we're going to get all the electricity from Infigen, Origin. We're also getting South Australian Power Networks historic data for the past 2 years and SA Power Networks data. That data is really interesting because it's going to be twin data with what we get from the retailer, and it's going to be, in fact, more accurate data, and it's going to give us a breakdown of the different types of street lights that we've got and what we could expect to get if we changed the street lighting to LEDs. So we felt that this was a really important additional data set in advance of any negotiations on changing Gawler street lights over.
Absolutely.
So
that's a fantastic bit of information.
Yeah, great comparative data. We're also continuing to get the natural gas data, water use data from SA Water, And then the new kid on the block is all of our fuel data for our transport emissions, and we'll get that for petrol and diesel. I don't think we've got any LP gas vehicles at all. So that's going to continue to improve our ability to account for our emissions and to trend our emissions into the future. Next year, we're going to try and see if we can consolidate systems a little bit more as well.
Wonderful.
Community emission snapshot, I ran through that at the start in that the contract's now been let and it's underway. So we'll update you when we hear more about the emission snapshot. But hopefully we'll get that before the end of the year so that we can incorporate that data into the Climate Emergency Action Plan. I'm thinking it's all going to wrap together in the next 6 to 8 weeks. We're going to be starting to get a really good document. And just a note to you about the street lighting. One of the reasons why the town of Gawler wasn't progressing changing of street lighting was because the advice from the local government association said, don't do it yet until a change where the Australian Energy Regulator takes control over the regulation of street lighting pricing. Now that change is going to occur on the 1st of July, which means that right now is the time that staff get together and start talking about how they would look to enter a project for changeover. A lot of councils do it in a way where they pay no upfront costs, but they pay a higher charge rate so that the street lights are changed, the emissions are reduced, the electricity consumption is reduced, and whilst they're paying a higher charge rate, they actually pay lower costs overall because of the reduced electricity consumption. So it's just one of those things, and we can enter into a similar contract. Norwood, Payne and St Peters Council have done it recently. There's no reason why the town of Gawler couldn't do it. I think we'd be aiming for no changeover costs, but that's not up to me. That's also up to the Ben and his team working on street lighting when we get to that. I'm just giving you a brief update that the opportunity is there for us to include it in the Climate Emergency Action Plan as a good, sensible action to undertake.
Marvellous, thanks, Tim. Did anybody have any other questions on those 3 topics? Or any comments? I'm not seeing anybody.
Just quickly.
I don't know why. I'm so sorry. I'm not seeing you.
I just want to clarify. So the regulator's taking over the pricing. So before, were we charged just a bulk lot? Was that the issue? That they distinguish between LEDs and all the others. That was it. An incentive to change them over because you just charge anyway.
Look, historically, there has been charging by South Australian Power Networks. They've just charged it as a blanket cost, what they thought was fair and reasonable. People that have looked into it with more specialist skills than I have in that area have said, no, this isn't fair, it's not right. There's been various challenges and various recovery notices and all sorts of things. But the Australian Energy Regulator is now coming in and saying, actually, it's been a bit of a mess. We're going to regulate the pricing structures. So now you all have to play to new rules.
Yeah, so now the incentive, I think Jack was working on that, weren't you, Jack, a couple of years ago at another council? Yeah, and it was just, that was it, that you paid that amount and it didn't matter how many LEDs you had. It was just bad luck Charlie, I suppose. Yeah. That's
exactly right. They just did not want to play any part in this at all, and there was no discussion. So
yeah, so sorry through the chair, but now this is happening, it's actually worthwhile to do. It's actually an incentive to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess, in the past, sometimes there's other ways of achieving what you want to achieve in terms of, but that involves, political advocacy, which is really a different kettle of fish. Whereas hopefully we don't have to worry about that in this process.
No, it's good. It's good to hear about time.
I think for those councils that had really specialised technical staff in that area, like Andy Legrand at Gawler, they were able to do other things, and Norwood made the decision to change, and other councils, Mitcham, I think, changed, and Unley changed. But I think for other smaller councils, really, it was always going to be a bit hard and a bit risky to do it on our own. Now we're in a better space.
Yeah, because that was sort of the reason, all those years was the main reason why we didn't move, I suppose.
Yeah.
There was even a time, Paul, when they wouldn't even return your phone calls.
Yeah, so so it was just really hard to do something, in council around this. Yep.
Okay, lovely. Any other questions or comments? Okay. This last item, Tim, the other business, risk and governance.
Look, I can just introduce it now. We don't need anybody to make a decision tonight, but because I'll probably put it in this climate emergency action plan anyway, and you can strike it out if you don't like it. But we've been invited, Resilient East and some other councils that started in Onkaparinga, they entered it into a process where they looked at risk and governance associated with climate change in councils. And it was a program of activities with executive and elected members to really understand the governance and risks and insurance risks and financial risks associated with climate change. We've been given some documents related to a project that Seed Consulting has been running on this, and I've put them on the Google Drive. There's an email with 3 attachments. So I'd really suggest that you have a look at that and understand a little bit more about what that initiative is. I think it would be really useful for us to include something in the climate emergency action plan about governance and risk associated with climate change, and an initiative that would cost a moderate amount of money, but would actually help our executive and elected members and senior staff really start to understand liabilities, directors' duties, whatever you call it, in terms of managing climate risk for the future.
Tim, is that specifically around the governance risks, or does it cover things like insurance risks and the community? Increasingly, there'll be issues around the inability to either afford or even get insurance and things like that.
I think it covers all of that as well.
Right, it does. Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's definitely a very important thing. So that's homework for everybody then, I take it.
Yes, please. Yes, I'll try and distill out of it what I think is important to get a half page in it, which is where I aim for, to get something into the climate emergency action plan. But then obviously we need to agree that it would be a good action to have in there. So this gives you some background and you have a chance to think about it. Maybe we'll put it on the agenda again for next time to have a secondary discussion around it.
Fantastic. Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, I think we've come to the end of our agenda. I'm assuming nobody has any particular last comments or questions on anything that we've covered tonight. Can't see anything. Okay, all right. It seems.
Shanks.
Oh, geez, it doesn't come up. Sorry, go on. Right. Go for it, Nathan.
No, sorry, that's I actually put my hand up then instead of because last time the symbol wasn't working. Look, I was just going to try to make a little bit of a suggestion. We've got our minutes there and everything like that. Is it possible to package together? We talked about a few different documents that some of us were able to get to, and then some of us weren't able to get into. Are we able just to get a bit of an attachments pack? I mean, it will sort of probably parallel the way we do it with council a little bit, but the documents that we're going to talk about, next meeting we're talking about it, revisiting the risk around governance and everything like that. Can we get that as an attachment as well, like sent through with the minutes? Is that possible?
It's possible. It's difficult to manage. We've got a fairly limited email size. So the more I package up big documents, the more we hit the limit on the email size. So I was hoping that we could maybe do it through the structures in the Google Drive, but it obviously hasn't worked. I'm not sure why it hasn't worked. Probably I didn't give people much time to make it work. But if we can put things on the Google Drive, then we can put those packs there. We can put all the minutes and the agendas and the packs in each meeting on there. But I'm not sure
Tim and I did have an ulterior motive, because we really want people to have input into the Google document for the plan, and we're aware that it's a little bit of a technology barrier if people aren't familiar with it. And so we were also adding new documents up on there in the hope that it might trigger some additional activity on getting over that kind of little technology barrier. So so I think perhaps in the first instance we can try and persist with it and see if it works, and then if it doesn't work, we'll quickly like let us know if you're really having problems, and then we can go from there. I'm no huge expert, but I certainly have used it a little bit, and so if anybody wants to call me real time if they're having problems with it, I'd be very happy to take their call. There's no guarantee I'm a fantastic techno help desk, but I'm certainly happy to take those calls in the first instance if that's of any help. Lovely. Any other final questions, comments before we close?
Big thank you to Megan as well for tonight, as always, for doing the minutes. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.
And thank you, Catherine, for chairing the meeting.
Taking so much the stress out of the process for me, Megan. So thank you. Okay, all right. So if we're all happy, we can close the meeting. And I think we did remarkably well because we covered a lot, and we're only about 15 minutes over, which we normally run longer than this. So I think we've done quite well. So well done, everybody. And it's been a lovely, positive meeting as usual. So thank you all.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.